So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this next in our series of In Conversation events. It's great to welcome here Sally Magnusson. Thank you so much for coming, Sally, and giving up your time. Sally, of course, needs no introduction. Sister of Anna.
Hey!
Eminent national broadcaster, BBC Breakfast Time, as it then was, I think, Breakfast News.
Breakfast News for a long time, yes.
Songs of Praise, Daily Politics, and of course Reporting Scotland. And you were recently voted Scotswoman of the Year at the Evening Times Awards. And you've been promoting your charity Playlist for Life, which we'll hear a lot about as a bit later on. The amazing initiative for folk with dementia and promoting music for them. And we're going to talk about your books. And just to give a quick housekeeping notice, we need to end quite promptly at 3:25. Sally's going to go across to sign copies of her books just over in the tent immediately opposite here, the CLC tent. So do please head over there and arm yourselves with her books. And we're here to talk, first of all, about The Seal Woman's Gift, which you might like to hold up to show everybody. Your novel. And then Where Memories Go, your much acclaimed work about your mother and the family and her condition. So let's start with the novel. And I think, Sally, you're going to read a bit from it first. But it's an astonishing story. I mean, I'm really interested in history. And it's all based on a true story from the 17th century of a Turkish corsair raid, pirate raid, on Iceland and the island of Westman, and how folk were basically captured and taken away in very barbarous conditions down to Algiers, and what developed from there. And it's based on a real story that you've obviously researched and done a huge amount of work on. So the first question is, what led you to wanting to write a novel based on that astonishing story from history?
Well, after I had written Where Memories Go, which we'll talk about in a moment, which is a memoir and is about dementia, and it became very popular. I think because you know it's an issue that concerns so many people. But my publisher came to me and said, "What are you going to write next?" And I didn't have an idea. And she said, well, what are the stories, what are the stories you'd really like to write about? And I told her, I found myself telling her about this story, which is one of the most traumatic events in Icelandic history, when 1627 Algerian corsairs arrived on the shores of Iceland and, as you say, abducted all these people. And I had just been reading a memoir that had just been translated into English by a pastor in the Westman Islands, Oliver Eilson, whose whole family had been abducted and taken to Algiers. And I was fascinated by the character of his wife, who appears very sort of fleetingly in his account, and just piqued my imagination about what the experience of a woman in that situation was, because women in the 17th century everywhere are silent and invisible. And I was telling my publisher about this, and she said, well, you must write about that. That's the story. And I said, yeah, the trouble is, not enough is known about their experience in Algiers to make it non-fiction. And she said, well, write it as a novel then. Write it as a novel. And I said, no, I don't do that. I don't make things up. I'm a journalist, No fake news in our house. Oh, no.
Never happens in journalism, of course.
Never. So I set myself the task, and I actually think that as you get a bit older, and I'm now ghastly thought of being past 60 myself, that is the time to start actually learning a new craft, forcing yourself past the comfort zone in which you've discovered all the things you can do quite well. And because I was terrified at the idea of actually writing fiction and being judged, as you are if you're a little bit well-known and you come out and you do something, people are going to read it and judge you. And I was terrified of all that, and I thought, well, that's the reason I have to do it. And so I set about writing this novel and I wanted to try and make of this novel not just a documentary account of an event in history, which actually is relevant to all of us, because these Algerian corsairs were actually raiding Britain. There were Scots in Algiers, there were Englishmen, there were Cornishmen, there were Irishmen, there were Italians and Poles and, you know, people from all over Europe who'd all been taken back, and it's been sort of written out of our own history. But it wasn't just to make a documentary account, it was to see if I could use this as a way in to talking about the universal human condition, about loss, about grief, about motherhood, about resilience in the face of life going wrong, about eyes that must open onto other cultures and other ways of being by dint of forced migration, by dint of taken from where they are to somewhere else, and also to write in a kind of a way about marriage and about redemption, and about sort of making the most of what life throws at you. So I tried to put into that novel something of what, in a curious kind of way, are the themes of Where Memories Go as well, because it's about you know, human beings and how they survive on this earth.
And it's where Reformation Christianity meets Islam in the 17th century as well, with quite a strong message around folk from both faiths understanding the other.
Yes, yes, that's right. I mean, I didn't realize when I started researching and when I started sort of working out what I would do with this novel, how much religious faith was part of it. But the more that you go into it, and Oliver Ailson, the pastor on the Westman Islands, who wrote this memoir that the book is the sort of the launch pad for the book, is actually a very moving account, because this is a man, a Lutheran priest at a time in Iceland, especially Iceland and Denmark, where the Lutheran faith came from at that time, from Germany before that. It's a very, very stern version of Christianity, and it was one in which punishment played a huge role in the way that they saw the world. So if bad stuff happened, it's because you've done something bad. And he is wrestling in his memoir with the idea that God is good and God plans good things for you, and yet here am I, my family's been sold into slavery, my beloved firstborn son has been the first choice of the pasha in the slave market, and goodness knows what's happened to him. I've been sent back to Copenhagen to get a ransom from the king, and the king sent me away. I've been in Algiers. These cruel people who have taken my family and all my fellow Icelanders have done such terrible things, and yet they're surrounded by fruit and vegetables. I've been given bread for my breakfast, and there's so much fresh bread that the remainder is thrown to the horses. And yet in Iceland, when we try and live the lives that we're supposed to live, we suck on fish bones. How can this be? How can this be fair? How can this be just? And so and these are the eternal questions, of course, about faith and about God all through history. And he's wrestling with that. And they're also wrestling with the fact that what made life bearable on this earth was the promise of another one, a promise of a better world. And the promise of actually, when you lose your children, as of course babies are being lost all the time in the 17th century, and children for all sorts of reasons, but when you lose them, you're going to see them again. You're going to see them again in the next world. What happens? They go to Algiers as slaves. The children are immediately taken away and brought up as Muslims. And that means they are never going to see them again, according to that worldview and that faith view of things. So it's a profoundly traumatic thing. But what I've tried to do in the novel is, and that's Oliver's experience, actually his historical experience, what I've tried to do with Austa, his wife, is to bring her into play with the man who buys her and the man who represents, as a slave trader, everything that is painful about what's happened to her and her experience, but to be put into a sort of kind of bantering, argumentative relationship that develops between them, whereby she has to begin to understand why he's done what he's done. And he has to a degree, understand where she's coming from. And they do this, the mode of discussion they have is story. she brings to him her Icelandic sagas, and that's what they discuss. And he turns these Icelandic sagas on her and says, by the way, these Vikings in Laxdæla saga that you're so very proud of, what were they doing in Ireland? You know, were they sightseeing? You know, I think not. They were taking prisoners. They were taking concubines. They were, you know, that she is forced, as I think we all are, when we are wrenched out of where we are comfortable, of our little bubbles, in the 21st century, of our social media WhatsApp groups, where everybody sort of agrees with you and makes you think that your opinions are pretty darn good. Wrench out of that and be forced into another perspective. And that is when life really, really challenges and opens out, sometimes to challenge and sometimes to a different kind of fruition, if you like.
And had you, I mean, the whole issue of sagas in Icelandic life, and you becoming aware of this story, did that date back partly from your visits to Iceland with your father, and you being imbued in the whole saga tradition?
Yes, it probably does. In fact, it definitely does. Yeah. Where else does it come from? Yes, my father was, my very earliest memories of home life are of my father tapping away in the study, translating the Icelandic sagas for Penguin Classics, and then going to Iceland as a child, and then later on seizing this aspect of my heritage as a teenager, learning the language and going round Iceland with not only my father, but the woman that the book is dedicated to, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, who's the former president of Iceland, who before she was president took me round the country, and we used to drive round at weekends, and she would be saying, you see that lava field over there, you see that rock, that's a troll there who was frozen there because she didn't get back to her home before the sun rose in the morning. You know, see that mound there, the elves live there, and we couldn't build a road through there because it would have meant knocking down an elf mound, and you can't do that because all Icelanders sort of believe in elves. And so that all just becomes part of your kind of mental furniture, I think. And then so when I came to do a book that was set in Iceland, and to think my way into the mind of a 17th century woman whose own mind must have been filled with sagas and with folklore, because that's how they spent their winter evenings. It was listening to stories, and the sagas were a very, very important part of Icelandic culture. That must have been what she took to Algiers with her. And my thesis in the novel, if you like, is that as she lost everything else, what remained to her was story, and what connected her to her homeland and to her deepest sort of self.
Which, without spoiling the story, takes her through the ordeal and what might have happened or might not have happened.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Did you want to read a brief
Do you think we've got time, or would you rather move on?
I think,
move
how about
on.
a quick, what do you think?
What?
I think...
Sorry. Right. I'll read a little bit then. Okay.
I think you read a bit, Sally, and I'll sit back and listen before I think of my next question.
Okay, well, look, this is just a wee quick bit then. Austa's been she's been in Algiers for 3 years. She's in as we know that she was historically in a fairly grand house, because Oliver describes that in the memoir. She's a valuable hostage because she's been sent off to get a ransom. I don't know if is this still working? Yeah. And she's managed to sort of avoid him for
should we swap mics, or are we?
What? Has my mic disappeared?
No, it's fine.
Oh, it's there! Just as well. I don't work in television, isn't it? Okay, so she's been summoned to see this slave owner for the first time, Outside the door, Austa smooths her hair back nervously, realizes what she's doing, and runs her fingers through it from the back instead, returning it to what Helga once described as seeded grass. Appalled to think she almost preened for this man, she knocks on his door. The chamber is glowing with the last of the evening sun, and the expensive wall ceramics facing the window are ablaze. Mellow light is flooding the mattress of golden yellow satin that dominates the room. At the foot of this mattress, Sillaby, in a long cream kaftan, is sitting with his legs crossed, having second thoughts. What was he thinking of? The woman looks like a beggar. Is there a chance, he prickles slightly, that she has messed her hair like that deliberately? Austa, standing just inside the door and determined not to look at his face, is concentrating on his hands. They're clean and slim, rather lighter of skin than she's noticed before, with neatly paired fingernails. There's a whiff of rosewater in the air. Sillaby beckons her forward with a jerk of his chin, and she drags her feet in his direction like a naughty child. She has an image of standing before her father in a similarly reluctant pose the day she pulled 6 feathers off the cockerel. And suddenly, she wants to laugh. It's nerves, of course, but the tiniest snort does escape her, and this only makes her worse. Gaily, she adjusts her gaze upwards. All of this, the satin quilt, the rosewater, the man with the shapely nails and polished head in an embroidered dress like a woman's, all of it's ridiculous. Look at me, she feels like saying. I'm Austa Thorsteinsdottir from Iceland. I'm a mother of 4 with freckles, and I ought to be getting home. Sillaby holds his gaze to a point around her knees. This was definitely a mistake. When she piqued his attention in the harem, coolly studying him from the other side of the room as if she had the right to look, she was not chuckling to herself and snorting like a mad woman. Could she be deranged? Alma has never suggested she's mad. The worst seamstress he could have brought home if he'd trawled the slave markets for a year, but not mad. I wish to lie with you, he says, patting the bed, thinking, do I? Austa notes again how formal the common tongue, that's the lingua franca of the Ottoman ports, sounds on his lips. It gives the words a politeness he may not intend. She does not move. Austa takes a careful breath. I have a husband, she says slowly, anxious to speak the words correctly and make her meaning clear. I do not lie with other men. It's of no concern to me how many husbands you have. Just the one. Pardon? I said, I have only one husband, and you have 2 wives, sir. She was not sure if sir was quite appropriate, but thought a signor would do no harm. What do you want with the wife of another? Austa. That is your name, I believe. You must know it is permitted in law for me to have 4 wives and as many concubines as I wish. Sillaby has an uneasy sense of being drawn into an explanation he is under no obligation to give. One day he will look back on this as the beginning. Do you know what a concubine is? Austa has not met this word in the language, but can guess. I believe there was one in the Laxdala saga. She was the daughter of the King of Ireland, a slave, like me. She sees it. She catches the exact moment that interest kindles in his eye, and he forgets to look at her knees. Sit down, would you, he says, less harshly than he meant to. There you go.
Thank you very much.
And basically, they take on it becomes a Scheherazade thing where she manages to fend him off for many years by telling him a version of the sagas each time.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for that reading, Sally. So let's talk now about Where Memories Go, published in 2014, but paperback in 2015. Hugely acclaimed and drawing a massive response, largely from families affected by dementia. And I found it a very moving account of you looking after your mother with Anna and your sister Margaret and your brother John, and everything that you went through, and your extraordinary commitment to looking after her at home, and all the issues around dementia that raised. Since that paperback, and when you reflected on the response you'd had. 3 years on, have you seen positive changes in care of folk with dementia and handling the condition and policy as well?
I think the issue of dementia is now much higher profile than it was. And I hope that the book played some part in that, but it certainly is not alone. And it's wonderful to see now that people with dementia themselves are now writing. There's a wonderful autobiography by a lady called, I think her name is Wendy Mitchell, who's actually got dementia, and she's writing about it now. And I think that just everybody from government and right across the health and social care sector are much more aware now. And that is the beginning of change. When we were wrestling with this, it was barely really acknowledged that the morass that families were struggling in, we were left to do it completely on our own. There was really nowhere to turn, and I looked for books, and I couldn't even find books that really spoke to the kind of experience we were in. And what we, and Anna will vouch for this, we felt, here are we, we are educated journalists, gift of the gab, we can pick up the phone and we can talk to social services, we should be able to understand self-directed support, we should be able to do this stuff, we have, we're not poor, we can hire in some help if we need to. All these things, we had everything going for us, and we were lost. We felt lost and abandoned and on our knees, and it was my sister who was doing the self-directed support, and my goodness, it was awful. It was all these forms to try and understand, and how you couldn't, you couldn't get somebody in unless you could sort out their pensions and everything else. It was really hard. And I wrote this, well, I wrote it for two reasons. One was personally to keep hold of my mother through words. I was writing a sort of diary, and I never wanted to forget how she put on her lipstick and how she did that with her hair, and the way she spoke, and the timbre of her voice, and the way she sang, and her harmonies, and on all these sort of things. And I thought, the way I capture things, other people might have taken photographs, but I have to process through words, and that's what I was doing. And then, as our journey went on, I just thought, this is not right. There are hundreds and thousands of families going through what we are, and I need to make this known, and I need to make this more of a sort of campaigning kind of document to let other families know that they're not alone, to give them permission to speak up, to tell doctors and nurses that they need to treat this as a serious illness and not just an unfortunate byproduct of old age. It is an illness. It's got a pathology, and it's not a natural part of aging. So that's why I kind of wanted to do it that way. And since then, I think that a lot of the issues I was campaigning about are recognized. The extent to which, action has been taken, it varies a lot. And, I think the Scottish government is to be commended on a lot of the initiatives they've taken, but there's still a long way to go. What has encouraged me most of all is that as a result of writing this book, I founded the charity Playlist for Life, as you say, which is about taking one aspect of non-pharmacological support and saying, look, we can offer this to people with dementia. So that we found, spending time with my mother, we found that the singing that she enjoyed doing and the fund of songs that she had from her early years that we all knew because they were all part of our Hogmanay parties for, years on end, that these songs became the way in which we could continue to connect with her as the dementia progressed. And the thing about dementia is that it it separates the person not just from the family, but from themselves. And my mother once described, I think it's in the book, once described the experience of having dementia to me as being on a long road, getting further and further away from myself. And what singing with her did, almost miraculously, was to summon her back from that long road. It was like, hey, Mum, over here. And you could do that just by singing You Can't Shove Your Granny Off a Bus. And she would be joining in, and she would be, you would see the light kindling in her eye, and she would be back. And Playlist for Life is about telling everybody that whether or not somebody has had an amazingly musical life or not, everybody's got a soundtrack to their life, and that soundtrack can connect them to themselves. And Playlist for Life has been taken up in the most amazing ways by churches, by libraries, by individuals. And what I would like is for governments actually to be able to seize more of these, and it doesn't need to be Playlist for Life, but more of these interventions that are based on things like music that are available to everybody and can make the experience of having dementia a little bit happier.
Given where we are today in the audience, is there any reflections on going to church? There are passages when you go to church with your mother and singing the hymns.
Yeah.
There's a joy on her face. Is there anything that churches might learn and congregations might learn a bit to be more inclusive, to actually encourage? I know there are a lot of dementia-friendly initiatives going on across society, but is there any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah. Well, my experience of churches is that actually they are making wonderful efforts to include people with dementia in the congregations, and they are very responsive to, for instance, to Playlist for Life. I think there's somebody here. Where's Irene, who's doing it at Carluke?
Well done.
Church in Carluke adopted Playlist for Life at a very early stage and recognized that this is a way in which they can work to include people with dementia. It's a personalizing thing, isn't it, Irene? It's a way of finding out what it is that makes a person tick, and giving them their music and giving them their place within the church. And of course, hymns are just the most wonderful way of connecting, because those who've had hymns in their past, they remain with them. And even if it's just Christmas carols, I mean, I'm all for giving people Christmas carols in July, because it connects them to family and to family memories and to happiness and to brightness. And I do think that, we've got loads and loads of churches working with Playlist for Life now. And if there are any more here today, do get in touch with us, and because we have a pack that we can help you get started on that. But churches I think are tremendous, and the ministers are now looking in all sorts of ways for including people. I always laugh with my mother. The one thing I remember with my mother, apart from how much she enjoyed church when she got there, was the day that the collection plate came round and she started to help herself. And it was both hilarious, but of course heartbreaking at the same time. But I think everybody understood. Oh, thanks very much. Very kind. Yeah.
I'll throw it open to questions in just a minute, but just one more sort of bigger picture thought about dementia. You go around and visit pharmaceutical companies and scientists, and the reality is, and I heard a bit about this with my day job, the pharma companies are not really that much nearer finding a miracle drug or a cure. That's the reality. It's going to be some time. So I think you challenge society through the book to say, look, we need to look at what the NHS does. And there's quite a harrowing passage about your mother needing to spend a couple of nights in hospital when she shouldn't really be there. And I think you say somehow the NHS and social care and the whole system has got to focus on very high quality dementia care for those who really need it. And otherwise it's got to be the community across the piece, not just the NHS, that does what it can to enable folk to be at home.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the problem is that we really kind of medicalized old age. We've medicalized everything. We think there've got to be medical solutions to things, and dementia absolutely thwarts that, because we are really no nearer a cure. And in fact, in many ways, I think we're probably further away now, because they're realizing that, there could be 40,000 versions of Alzheimer's and dementia. It could be like cancer. And the more that they understand, the more they understand how variegated it is, and how really unlikely it is that you are going to be able to find a cure that's going to work for an awful lot of people. They are still working, and that's great, but they should be focusing their efforts on other sorts of ways of ameliorating the condition. And that is more and more what the NHS really has to do. Now, the trouble is that these interventions they're time consuming, because they're personal, because they actually involve spending time. Playlist for Life, we train care homes. We go into care homes and we show them how finding out the musical preferences of somebody and offering it at certain times of the day, how that can be done, and therefore not need the knockout medications that are normally given for agitation. And we train them how to do that, but we have to explain to them that it will be time consuming. Start with one person, get it right with one person, then move on to 2 people, and then move on to 3, and do it that way, and eventually it will change the culture of the care home. Your staff will be happier because they're seeing rewards. Your residents will be happier because they've got access to their music and they're feeling reconnected. And what we're now finding is that, this is a story for you, Hugh, actually. Doctors are starting to prescribe music interventions in homes where they understand how to use it, instead of these sort of, they usually end in the word ZAM, medications, and they kind of knock people out, and then they fall and have injuries, and then it spirals, and they're out of themselves, and the family come in to visit them, and they can't get anything out of them because they're zonked. And so if you can get it right, and it doesn't need to be the particular intervention that we do, there are others. There's art, and there's choirs, and there's all these things which have tended to be viewed as peripheral activities. And what we're saying is, make these core activities. Put your money, NHS, into that, and you will change the culture, and you will ultimately, and the health economy research needs to be done to show it, you will eventually save money that way and change everything. But it's hard to get them started on it.
We must get some coverage going on that, definitely. So I've broken my own rules, and I'm running a bit behind time, but I'll have to punish myself afterwards. But we've got 10 minutes for questions. All I'd say is there is a roving mic. Please keep it as brief as you can, and Sally will do her best to answer it.
Briefly as well. Yes.
I wasn't going to say that. So do we have a question?
Over there.
Over here.
Thank you, Sally. This is about your novel. Has it been translated into Icelandic, and how have the Icelanders received it?
It is being translated even now, and it's out in the autumn. So the Icelanders haven't been exposed to it yet properly. The 1 or 2 who have read it seem to think it's all right. Effusiveness and Icelanders don't go quite together, but it's all right, I think, is the answer. By which I mean that it hasn't flouted Icelandic history. That was my terrible fear, that I would make some awful solecism that would, because they're very, very, sort of anxious about getting their history absolutely right. And it seems to be fine from that point of view. But I won't know until the autumn how they accept it.
Okay, microphone's coming around. If you try and catch my eye while the next question's been asked, we'll try and get the mic to you so you're ready with the next one. Thank you.
In relation to dementia, thank you for saying a bit about how churches can and do include people with dementia. Could you say something about ideas for ways that churches and individuals can support those caring for people with dementia?
Gosh. I'm not quite sure. You mean support in the sense of just, understanding what they're going through, do you mean? And oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I don't know that I'm the best. I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer that. You mean from my point of view as somebody who cared for somebody with dementia? I suppose it's just kind of knowing what they might be going through, and knowing that although families present a fairly good front to the world, that actually they can be weeping inside an awful lot of the time, and perhaps respite is a really good way. Maybe it's to go to families and say, "Can I sit with your mother today, and let you go and do something else?" I think that's probably a really good idea, actually. Yeah. What a good question. It's a terrific question, but I think it's maybe to understand the experience, and that it's hard, and it's harder than it looks. It's always harder than it looks. It's always very hard to explain to anybody else why this is such a heartbreaking experience and why your nerves are just like that the entire time. And if you kind of understand that, and then say, what can I most do for you, and see what it is. And sometimes sometimes I think people who've got dementia in the family, and I think this was reflected with Barbara Windsor's husband recently when he broke the news that she had Alzheimer's, and it was because he was finding it terribly. It was making him very anxious taking her out anywhere, because he felt that people didn't understand why she might be rude to them, or why she might act in a way that they would find strange, and that made him very kind of uptight. And I think families go through that period where they're trying to protect the person from saying something that other people will think is odd, and that is very, very stressful. And I described somewhere in the book taking my mother to a place where she had to give a talk at a funeral, and it was the last sort of public thing she ever did, because I found it so nerve-wracking. And she went to give this speech, and she started on it, because she used to be a great public speaker, and my sisters and I had actually written her speech for her, and we'd practiced it with her, and she was very good at it, and she delivered it wonderfully. But then she got to the third page of her speech, turned over the page, and there was the first page again, so she started again. And she started on the whole speech again, and I was sitting absolutely curling up in agony for her. Whereas actually what happened was, at 3/4 of the way through the speech for the second time, the minister just wonderfully got up and said, "Thank you very much, wonderful," and started to lead her out. And of course, the whole funeral erupted in the most wonderful, spontaneous applause for her, because everybody kind of got it, and it was absolutely terrific. And it was at that point that I realized that this was my, I had to let that go. But people helped me to do that by showing me that it was all right. And I think if you can do that for other, what a short answer this is, but if you can do that for other families, that's the best thing you can do. Make them feel it's all right.
Sally, the Uplift Foundation have just produced a paper that you might be aware of called Without a Song or a Dance, What Are We? Discussed in the House of Lords just recently. you mentioned how important it is for investment at a time when social services are broken, NHS resources are broken. How do we gain those resources, those financial resources, which I think are desperate within the arts to work with people with dementia?
The answer is, I wish I knew. Because it's exactly right. All the charities, organizations are looking for that kind of money, and Playlist for Life is desperately looking for resource. That was a terrific report, and in fact, the chief executive of Playlist for Life was one of the commissioners on that report. Governments are not putting their money into these things just now. Philanthropists may, if they hear about it. So I would say get the word out, and if you know anybody with money, tell them to put it into it. But it's hard. It's hard.
We've got a bit of competition over there, but anyway, yes, over there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your Playlist for Life.
Where? Sorry, sorry that you are.
Yes, I was a social worker in the mental health team in my local authority, and 90% of my clients had dementia. And I told everybody about Playlist for Life. And one of the things that meant most to me was one particular woman who was very, very aggressive, tore her own clothes, her clothes had to be changed all the time. She would throw furniture around, attack people in the home that she was in. She was in a locked ward. And I told her sister about Playlist for Life, and that woman's life was transformed, as was the staff. Couldn't believe it was the same person. So that was wonderful. So when I retired last year, I decided that I wanted to run something in our church for people with dementia where they could come and sing. So we call it Community Chords, and it's fantastic. It's really great. Everybody loves it. We sing all the old songs, and they can put in their requests for songs that they want to sing. And I found it might be an answer to what churches can do. We have become a dementia-friendly church. Alzheimer's Society will come and do a course with members of the church, and you become a dementia friend. You have your wee badge. I don't have mine on today, but once you've done the course, you become a dementia friend. It's a wonderful course, and they also tell you about things that you can do within the church to make it dementia friendly, like even changing the colour of the toilet seats, etc. So it's superb. If any church wants to do it, get in touch with Alzheimer's Society, because they will do it. They'll be happy to do it.
That's great.
And thank you so much for Playlist for Life. Thank you.
Well, not at all. And it reminds me of there's a care home called Lilyburn, which we trained, and there was a woman there who was on 2 lorazepam a day, which is a huge amount. And they weaned her off that with the help of the doctors. The doctor said, "Okay, let's try this." And she got her music and said, and the family came to us and they said, "We have got our mother back."
That's right.
And it's just, it just gets you right in the gut, because it's not that woman's got any less dementia than she had before, but she's got a bit of herself back, and that's all the families want.
That's
just that bit of the person that they love there, even if it's not kind of there all the time.
Yes.
But you can get it a few times a day with the music.
Yes.
Yeah.
The staff in the home told me that as soon as something kicked off, they would put this lady's earphones on and play her music, so she wasn't involved in anything that was going on anywhere else. So she would sit there quietly listening to her music and smiling and singing away to herself while all this was going on around her.
And that's why, indeed, we do suggest the headphones thing.
Yes.
And it's not that you have to have it. If somebody really doesn't want it, it's fine. But because, to sit and have ambient noise when you've got dementia, especially a television going on in the corner, which is often what they've got, or indeed music that doesn't mean anything to them, just kind of blaring out in the background, is intensely annoying and agitating, and gets people like that, as you can imagine it would. Whereas you put that on and you put something that matters to them on, and you get an immersive experience of something calming and nice. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm very sorry, folks. We could do more. It's a real shame to end it, but we do need to move on. Sally will now be signing copies of her books just over the way here at the CLC book tent. And so she'll give her a little bit of time to get over there and then go and form an orderly queue. But on behalf of you all and Heart and Soul and In Conversation, can I just say a big thank you to Sally for giving up your Sunday afternoon and speaking so wonderfully. Thank you.